Welcome to yet another beautiful episode of The Green Line right here on Rapid TV. Now, I had an amazing week so far, and I'd say that if I should rate the week, on a scale of 10, which I always will do, I'll give it a solid 8 over 10, and 2% because, I had to snuggle out of bed all the time. I have to struggle to get up, but that's okay because we're here every single day of the week to talk about matters that are important. Welcome to The Green Line. My name is Martha Alu, and as always, I will be your host on the show on The Green Line. Last week, we were able to spotlight some of the major innovations and the contributions to the agricultural sector. And this week, we're talking about women. Hold on a little bit. When we talk about women, a lot of people can get really, why is it always about women? But today's conversation is fact-checked, and it's important that we talk about the inclusivity of women in the agricultural sector. Now, women are the quiet engine of our agricultural system, from seed selection to planting to processing to market sales as well. And women account for an estimated 60 to 70% of the agricultural labor force. That's a lot. And you'd remember that from time before, you'd hear I'll say our forefathers say stuff like, we had to marry like 7 wives because these women will help us on the farmland. We have to marry this number of wives because the more children we have, the more wives we have, the easier it is for us to cultivate our farmland. At what point did women become so irrelevant in the agricultural space? Now, when it comes to land ownership, access to finance, mechanization, and policy influence, their presence fades dramatically. So today we're talking about their representation, about why the people who grow most of our food own the least productive assets, why women farmers receive less than 15% of agricultural land and significantly lower access to credit, extension services, and technology. And historically, Nigerian women have always farmed. But structural systems, cultural norms, and land tenure laws and financial exclusion have kept many at the margins of ownership and decision making. Today, our conversation is out to address very pertinent questions. Are women truly included in Nigeria's agricultural growth story, or are they simply carrying its weight? And what must change if agriculture is to become profitable, sustainable, and inclusive for everyone? And to have that conversation with us today is someone who is an expert in the agribusiness. And yes, she's also a woman, because how do we bring men to talk about what is so important about women? She is Naona Usor. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I would say, some part of me would say, when I saw your DP, I was like, she really farming? Is she really in the agri space? And what's the reaction, especially when people see that you're very interested in agriculture, seeing everything that you have done over the years as well?
Well, surprise initially, but then they just get used to it. I think now, which is better than like 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we have a lot more women participating in agribusiness, not just in production, but further up the value chain of processing, marketing, and trade. We do have women who are doing it even more sophisticated than what was previously the case. So yes, surprise initially, but then acceptance later.
Okay, right. So let's hear what do you do in the agricultural value chain? What is your main area of operation or focus?
Okay. So presently I work in the public and public sector.
Thank you.
I'm not here in that capacity,
Yeah,
so disclaimer,
certainly.
I'm not here in that capacity. But previously I worked in the private sector. I worked for agribusinesses.
Okay.
I led projects, led programs, and a lot of the programs that we implemented were targeted at women, women farmers, women cooperatives, women processors, mini-scale processors. Back in 2020, we managed a MasterCard Foundation funded project targeting 65,000 farmers across several states in Nigeria. And we had a target for 80% women. So that led us, and the focal states were in the north, northeast, northwest, north central. So that led us to innovate in terms of how do we get more women to register, how do we get more women on board, how do we get more women to participate in the program. And like I said, we had to sit down, put our heads together, find out what the issues were, why women participation was low initially, and begin to strategize and map out different activities that we could implement to support the women to, take part in the program. Not just take part in the program, but, access the full benefits that of the services and the what we were offering them.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's start with the very first question. Women make up an estimated 60 to 70% of Nigerians' agricultural labor force. And I did make an example about how people would marry previously a number of wives just so they have more people on the farmland and have more children also on the farmland as well. Now, regardless of that fact, they have less than 15% of agricultural land. This is women now we're talking about. How do we explain this paradox of high participation and very low ownership?
This challenge it's something that we've sat in rooms to discuss, the separation of land from rights. So men hold the rights to the land, while women provide the labor. The Nigerian agricultural system functions on that dichotomy that I've just put forth, where women, like I said, provide labor and men own the land. I read somewhere, and it's very interesting, the Usufruct Tract. Women are given rights to use land and to feed their families, to make some income, but are denied alienation rights, which is the right to buy, and which is the right to sell this capital asset. The right to use this asset as a collateral for loan. So basically what it comes down to is access, and what it comes down to is land ownership. If women are denied the right to own land, then that limits their ability to access capital. And without capital, you cannot grow your business, you cannot expand your business. Without capital, you can't, like I said, invest. So it comes down to the ability for women to own land. So we're looking at a Land Use Act of 1978 that is gender blind, basically. I know that there was a landmark ruling by the Supreme Court to UKJ versus UKJ that says a woman cannot be denied the right to, her late spouse's land, and that was unconstitutional. But implementation in the rural areas has been basically non-existent. So we still have situations where a spouse lives, passes away, and the in-laws come to seize the land because it's a woman. And women are also viewed as transient. When she's young, she's in her father's house. They're preparing her for marriage, so she's moving on. When she's in her husband's house, it's like she can come and she can go. So they see women owning land as risky. So I think that has really propagated this women providing labor and not being able to have the rights for these capital assets that they need to expand. And I would say that we're leaving a lot of money on the table by women not being able to utilize the land, to buy land, to sell land, to use it as collateral. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. According to the World Bank, we're leaving an estimated $8.1 billion US annually, just from women not being able to, like I said, access capital that they require to scale, to thrive. We have the direct benefits and the indirect and the spillover effects of that. But it was estimated at about $8.1 billion, which is a lot of money. To put it into context, some states in Nigeria put together don't have that budget, per annum. So yes, that's a lot of resources that we're leaving on the table.
Now, what do you think is responsible for this? I know that you've mentioned partially what the role that the culture plays in some of this. I know the African culture sometimes hides these relegations and these marginalizations in that's what the culture demands and that's what the culture says that the woman should be like. But aside that, we have moved from the century where, all of this is such a big deal. People are now more informed, people are more educated, the rights of women has advanced, but we don't see that translated in the agricultural space. What do you think is responsible for this?
Well, historically in Nigeria, women have always farmed. Women have been the frontliners in terms of farming, in terms of, crop production, in terms of trade, particularly for commerce. Women have traditionally been the frontliners. So we have, I would say, three periods, pre-colonial, colonial era, and post-colonial. In the pre-colonial era, women occupied seats of, decision-making seats, in the Yoruba land. So I recently watched a movie, the Fumilayo and I don't know if you've seen that movie, but when I did my research, I found out that, women had, places, women occupied decision-making seats, in the council.
That they had to fight for.
Yes, and this introduction of this men being the breadwinners was introduced by the colonialists, So that was surprising to me, that it was introduced to our culture. So Africa as a whole, women occupied decision-making seats. Women, took decisions that would affect them. And so we had that period. The British introduced this dichotomy, and then now post-colonial, we now have the Land Use Act, which is further propagating alienation of women's rights in terms of owning capital assets. And for me, I think that, like I said, it's getting better. A lot of women are becoming more and more exposed to the opportunities that exist in the agribusiness. However, when we talk about primary production and women in the rural areas, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, because there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap in terms of access. And I keep going back to access because that's a consequence of our inability to own capital assets, access to resources, access to quality inputs that they need to improve their productivity, access to information, and then now we've reached the age of AI, right? And it's moving rapidly, but we still have many women who are unable to even operate a non-digital phone. So, and that gap is widening. For example, if you want to own land, there's a bureaucracy that women also have to break. You have to get the governor's consent. That's a bureaucratic process that women are. Yes, CFO is governor that approves. So you can. So how many women? Let's look at the regions where women have restrictive, movements, mobility restrictions. How many women will be able to pursue, for example, getting a CFO in the state capital with the governor? How many women can afford to jump that loop of bureaucracy? So there's so much that we need to do as a people. But I think the first and the major thing for us to do is to look at the Land Use Acts and mainstream gender. Think about women and our peculiarities. And so for me, that's the bottom line. We need to look at the Land Use Act. I know that we do have the National Collateral Registry that is now is promoting the use of movable assets as collateral, but there's still a long way to go. But
the thing is, let's talk about it. Should I say, let's talk about it from a very realistic point?
Yes.
Because whenever we raise conversations about women participation in different sectors, politically, in different sectors, just like in the agricultural space as well, one of the major defense that a lot of people will put forth is the fact that women are not able to fill up these positions, and fill up the positions in terms of how many women can actually use tractors, how many women can apply these mechanization tools that they're pushing for. Because of course the statistics have also showed that has also shown that most women do not have access to credit, mechanization. They don't have access to extension services, just as the men usually would have. And they put forth this defense. Do you think, seeing as you have dealt with women, you know, across board, private, public sector, in the agricultural space, do you think that this is fact? Or do you think there's so much more that women need to do? Or we also play a part in making sure that we are relegated by a lack of putting our best foot forward, and what have you?
So women's representation in policy making for designing inclusive agricultural interventions is crucial. A lot of the times that, and so this goes back to what you just said earlier. We are at the labor, we are labor centered, but we don't have a seat at the table where the decisions are made. If you go to any commodity cooperative, I haven't done the stats, but I can imagine how many women occupy presidency of those major commodities. I can imagine how many women sit on boards in the major agribusiness firms that we have in Nigeria. So when women are not involved in the policy making or the intervention designs, then you will have intervention designs. Sometimes men sit down around the table and design interventions for women. Of course, they don't understand the plight of the woman. I mean, they may understand it, but they've not lived that experience. So, for example, an intervention is being designed, right? And there's no female representation. A female representation will point out that, look, tractors are good, right? However, a woman being able to operate, because of the cost of tractors, it may not be feasible for women with the limited capacity to utilize that tractor effectively. But handheld motorized machines, just to save some time, because another thing women suffer is time poverty when they spend a lot of time doing childcare, doing unpaid labor, etc. A woman on the table would point out that yes, tractors are good, subsidized tractor programs are good, but we also need handheld, smaller equipment that are easier for women to afford, easier for women to use, etc. So women occupying seats in those kinds of positions, policy making, intervention design is very important. A male policymaker would just say, look, there's no extension. Farmers, the ratio for farmers to extension officer is 5,000 to 1, 500,000 to 1. Let's develop a program to promote access to extension services. A woman sitting there would realize there needs to be more women trained as extension workers, so that women can also access extension services, particularly in areas where culturally men and women are not supposed to interact. It would be difficult for a male extension officer to go to the house of a woman farmer and to offer advice, but a woman can also do it, which is one of the things that we did in the program that I managed. We realized that for more women to participate, we needed more female extension workers. So we sought them out and we trained them as female extension workers, and they were able to carry out the job. So women occupying those kinds of seats are important. I think any intervention design that does not have a woman represented is malpractice. I would say it's malpractice. We need to. There needs to be a balanced view. There needs to be a balanced.
Okay. And also, we're talking about stats now and data. It says that if women are allowed the same opportunity that men have access to, the entire agricultural space will grow by about 20 to 30%, which is a significant increase if you ask me. Why do you think that this gap has not been aggressively filled? Because if we're talking about, what's the easiest example we can use right now? If we're talking about other areas, okay, reserved a seat bill for women. We see people have done demonstrations here and there. People have held advocacy meetings, and they've talked about how it's so important for women to be a part of conversations like this. Women should also be in the room when decisions are being made. Yet, when it comes to agriculture, you'd see that politically, I would say that we have made significant increase.
Yeah.
You know, we have advanced women's rights. There's so much more that can be done. But when it comes to agriculture, we don't see that aggressive push for the policies to accommodate more women, for more women to be prioritized in the agricultural space. Why do you think that it's different when it comes to agriculture?
Is it so different, really?
Yes. How many protests have been held for women to hold seats or to hold positions when it comes to agriculture? I mean, how many? We have somehow just said, this is not a woman's job. This is not a woman's responsibility. Let's just leave it to the men. Or maybe we have also unconsciously played a part in doing that. But we don't see advocacy. I don't see, at least.
So I think, thinking about it, that's a very interesting question. I think that because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have the data, but I think majority of the players in the agri space, most of the players that are women are at the lower end of the value chain, which is the crop production, and that is in rural areas, and most of them are illiterate. So I think that plays a big part in the, and being in this sector, before I moved to the agri sector, I knew little to nothing about agriculture in Nigeria. I go to market, buy what I need, cook, and that's it. I don't know where the food is coming from. Yeah. I don't know what it took for that farmer to I didn't understand the production aspect. I didn't understand the logistics aspect, even the union aspect. I understood nothing, right? And that's what is happening. A lot of people don't understand the sector. So when you talk about, advocacy for it, you first have to understand an issue before you can now advocate. That's why shows like yours are very important, because you bring the issues to the fore and get people to understand. And I think another thing is, I'll point out, look, I'll call it policy laziness. Okay. Let me just call it that, policy laziness, because it's easier to just design a program and say, okay, we want to design an intervention, an intervention program, for example. Or tractors, the data on tractors says Nigeria needs more tractors. Let's just provide tractors at a subsidized rate, right? It's harder to sit down to say, okay, how do we mainstream women? Okay. How do we develop a social program that attracts more women and helps more women to come on board? It's not easy to develop those kinds of programs, and you spend more resources doing it. So I think a lot of the time it's policy laziness, and we're only focused on the immediate outcome. We're not looking at the big picture. So I think if you look at the big picture view, and what can come out, what are the outcomes of involving more women in the sector, and then I think we may begin to see a more mainstream policy design, a more mainstream intervention design. Women are generally viewed as charity. Let's just tokenism. Let's just help them. But they're not
like some sort of handicap. I saw the bill where they were saying they will reserve seats for women alongside people with disability, and I'm like, do you guys not see that there's a problem that you're putting that side by side?
Exactly. So yeah, it's a challenge. So we need to be more intentional. We need to be more intentional, and that starts with having more women in Senate. That starts with having more women in legislature that can push for these kinds of bills to be passed. More women need to sit at the table. If not, the exclusion gap will continue to grow wider. And like I said, the big picture. We don't just market women as charity, market women as investable businesses. Actually. Let's go with numbers. Let's not go with sentiments.
Okay. What structural changes do you think Nigeria must make? I know you've talked about including them in rooms and policies. First, for the woman herself, what structural policies do you think, or structural changes do you think the woman needs to make to be able to accommodate this change, or to be able to advocate for these policies to be given her, or for these rights rather to be given her? Also, as a country, Nigeria, what structures do you think we need to adjust to accommodate the woman to make sure that we have like a fair deal in the agricultural space for both men and women?
That's the ultimate question you've just asked. So Nigeria has this thing I would call a systemic dissonance, where we actually say we want something, or but when we design a product, a program, we have not intentionally, the programs and products are gender blind. there needs to be, and then when we have, like the National Gender Policy of 2019, which was, landmark, but there are no legal frameworks around it. So those targets and quotas in the policy are, just mere suggestions. There needs to be, first of all, let's start with that. Can we have some legal backing to that policy? And then in terms of every government's program for agriculture, I think across the board, but let's talk about, we're speaking about agri, must have targets for women, and there needs to be incentives to reaching those targets. There needs to be incentives, or else, we're going to continue with the status quo. There needs to be incentive, and there also needs to be incentive for not reaching those targets. But so if you do that, then whoever is implementing now has the motivations to say, okay, let me give you an example. We developed a program to train women to use tractors, in 2021, 2022. And some of the women who applied and qualified to be on the training had babies, right? You cannot be developing a program targeted at women without considering the fact that they could have kids to care for, and kids that they can't leave by themselves. So we made arrangements. It cost more money, but two of them came with their babies and a nanny, and we paid for that. That was paid for. And that was not a hindrance to their performance. The babies being there did not hinder them. They were top performers. So, when we're developing programs, it can't be just lip service. There are challenges that women have, and it's, like I said, time poverty, being the one responsible for caregiving, not just children's, but sometimes even their aged parents, their in-laws. The burden is on the woman. So we have to take all that into consideration when we are developing programs. And then we need to develop, strategies for women to help them overcome some of the challenges they may face so that they can access the programs and services. And then there's the literacy gap. We can't do this without talking about literacy. Absolutely. So, and for me, that the one that really bothers me is the digital literacy gap, because right now everything is digital. Even government programs are digital. You want to apply for this loan, it's digital. Anything you're doing is digital now. And then for someone who's illiterate, how do they access those kinds of, how do they access gaining access to maybe loan services, etc. Even extension now, a lot of extension is digital. And even though I know that there are a lot of firms who are trying to develop extension training or extension services in vernacular, right? But there still needs to be
basic level literacy.
Yeah, the digital gap is widening, not just in terms of the literacy, but in terms of infrastructure, costs, access. And so that keeps me up at night, Yes, because the world is going digital.
But I think the women also have a part to play. I understand the fact that some of these policies don't encourage a lot of women to participate as they would love to. But at some point, I think that we also became redundant. Should I say, we also did not push for the rights anymore. And that's why from the start of the show I said, when you deprive someone of a thing for a very long time, they become used to not having it at all. And I think that that's where a lot of women have settled when it comes to agriculture and advancement in this space. We have settled. We're like, you know what, I fought for it so long, and I haven't been given what I have been fighting for. So, I mean, it's time for me to walk out of the room. And you made mention of the movie you watched, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. And if you watched the movie, by the way, and you'd see that the women had to fight.
Of course.
So what a man will get on a platter, you'd have to fight like 2 times that to actually get it. You see? So I don't think it's time to settle. I think it's time to actually demand for these rights. Because if you don't demand them, I mean, you're not going to get them anyways.
Let's go back to Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. So they fought. But who mobilized them?
The women.
It was an educated woman.
Absolutely.
So that's what I mean. The vast majority are illiterate. Being able to think strategically comes from education, right? So we need the educated women amongst us to do more to mobilize the rural women, to push, to advocate. So yes, I think the burden now is on us that are educated and that live in the urban areas and have access to information, we can enter rooms that the rural woman can enter. I think the burden is on us to push and fight, like you have said. Yes.
Well, that's why we have you. Well, I think this is where we wrap up the conversation for today. I'll see you next time on The Green Line, where we talk about policy, we talk about reforms, and all that is important in the agricultural ecosystem. My name is Martha Alu. I'll see you next week.